We have a question from Michael. What was the main motivator in switching to a contractor from a permanent background? So just open to any panelists to answer.
It was the money.
That's a good, honest answer. We'll go into the money later on, actually, because there'll probably be a lot of questions in there. So Jason Warner, would be good to reflect on a specialist versus generalist contractor. What are the common specialisms, the role itself, technologies and domains?
Sorry, could you repeat that question? I was just trying to possibly respond.
Yeah, so we got one from Jason Warner in the chat. So he asks, it would be good to reflect on specialist versus generalist contractors. So what are the common specialisms in contracting for IT?
I would say, I guess you without putting figures on it, that's one of the things that you've got flexibility with. You can look at what contracts are available, and I can speak to me personally. I have turned work down when I've been approached, and I have looked at other contracts I had opportunities to do, which I made more money with. I guess I've sort of not turned them down. I put them on the back burner, and I think that's an option that certainly I've had, and I think certainly working in the tech sector, there was so many work opportunities. I think probably everyone's had something like that.
Yeah, I've worked with like lots of different people, like developers, project managers, support people. From a project management point of view, like transition managers and service management type people. Even like quite a lot of testers, contract testers, and there's like quite a broad range of people from a technical background as well. You'll have your Windows specialists, and you'll have your Unix, like Linux specialists, your DBAs. I tend to find that a lot of the people you work with are very focused in one technical area. So yeah.
Cool, thank you. So we've got a question from Jenny. What's your insights of the impact of IR35 on your contractor career this year? It's an interesting question.
Is there anyone from the HMRC on the call?
So for me, I'm a permie, so I've not done contracting, so I'm not too sure about the IR35 stuff. But it just, yeah. Anybody got any?
I've certainly filled it in before, but I can't give you any details about it. But I think the work I tend to do is sort of government based. So, there's everything's above board, if you like, in terms of my income and my taxes. We're being recorded, but I don't mind saying that. There's nothing to hide.
I completely agree.
Is it? Yeah, I suppose is it that thing where I know there was a lot of changes around IR35 where a lot of people were considered just self-employed, and then eventually were then considered as being part of the company. So the tax status changed.
I was going to I guess some people might not know what it is. I think it's about whether or not, if you're working for an organization, if you're working for them over so many hours, are you entitled therefore to be classed as an employee of the company, rather, and it's that borderline decision, isn't it? Which is why you fill it in.
And in April, obviously, the changes that were implemented in the public sector are implemented in the private sector as well. So the onus for larger companies, if you're working for a larger company, the onus on determining your status of IR35 fell with the organization that you were basically you were working for. So if you if they determined that you were inside IR35, i.e. that you were basically just like another employee, then they should tax you like that. And that, I think, the people that I know has had a massive impact on a lot of them, having to either leave contracting or join an organization as a permanent employee because of that, or move to maybe working through an umbrella company, whereas they would previously have worked through their own limited company. So it's had quite a lot of impacts to a lot of people that I know since April.
I know that my accountant, that's another thing you have to do, organize yourself an accountant to organize your tax returns and things like that. And he said that a lot of people were having issues. It was catching people out, the IR35. So, you know, I don't know a lot about it, but certainly it's, as David's pointed out, it's caught people out.
One thing I would say as well is that if you are worried about IR, if you're thinking about leaving your permanent job and going to become a contractor, and you're worried about IR35, now would be the perfect time to make a move, because if you are looking at roles and they say that they're inside IR35, you're planning to work through an umbrella company, there are no tax risks in relation to IR35 at all. You will be taxed more money on your earnings, but you will, in theory, earn more and have more in your pocket at the end of the day than you would have if you were a permanent employee. And there's literally zero tax risks for you because you are being taxed. You're paying tax like you're an employee anyway. So if you're deemed inside, and if you are going for a role where they're deemed it, the role is outside IR35, and you accept that role, then as I understand it, the risk then is not your risk anymore. It's the risk of the employing company or the contracting, your customer. So in a sense, the recent changes have made it a little bit clearer in relation to the risks that you would be taking if you did start contracting.
Well, thanks very much. That's interesting answers to that question. So I don't think this is a question from Michael, but it might have actually been answered by David's response over money, but we'll get back to money in a little bit, because I think there's a few questions building up towards now. So Stevie's asked, where would the panel say are the richest resources for hunting down contracts to earn and get noticed? So I think we're moving slowly into that money territory. So what would you think about being the best areas of contracting, maybe the most lucrative ones and the ones that might get you noticed more?
The best skill sets, do you mean?
I think so. I think that's what Stevie might be getting at.
I think he meant what are some of the resources where we can get contracting back from. So I mean, where will you go to hunt down and get noticed for these kind of jobs?
See, I think yeah.
Yeah, like LinkedIn.
Yeah, there we go.
I find LinkedIn's been good recently.
I know in education, local authorities often look to bring education contract work in if they've got some service level agreements with schools, and various other companies which operate, within the education environment, advertise various positions, but you've just got to keep an eye out on vacancies on these. I think industry's obviously a lot wider. And I guess that's an area I could also go into. I'm also a software developer, but sticking with education at the moment, but at some point I might dip my toe into that as well. That's the flexibility you have, I suppose.
And I think so Steve's asked, where the advertised found. So there is LinkedIn jobs, as you say, but the BCS have also relaunched the recruitment website, which advertises quite a lot of contracting job. And I'm sure there's a website called IT Contractors Online, which might advertise quite a lot of IT contracting jobs.
Yeah, JobServe as well. I've got quite a lot of use out of. For you just go on there, you put in your skill, shows you what contracts are available. You can select your rates and if you want a permanent job or a contract job. And there's a few other sites like that. Monster, I think, is another one. But...
And also there's there was supposed to be a couple of recruiters in here from a company called Nigel Wright or Nigel Frank, and they're quite big digital recruitment companies who do look for contractors as well. So it's worth looking at them. I think, is it Nigel Frank International? And the local company is also the Ronald James Group as well. So, but as Dave says, I think a lot of these people are on LinkedIn, so it's just finding out where they are, and then as soon as they notice your skill set, they'll start messaging you about contracting roles.
And what I've found with LinkedIn as well is, obviously, if you keep your details reasonably up to date, people will contact you and you'll talk to them about something. They'll make a note of you, and then they'll keep checking back in on you. And there are certain agencies that will contact you regarding certain roles. So if you've got a specific specialism, there might be agencies that will contact you. And if you research those agencies, there are some good ones. There's some ones that are fairly big, organized companies, and they are usually quite good to work for and good to sort of keep in touch with. And you might get to know these people a little bit. Like over the years, you'll talk to them regularly, and it's worth just remembering some of their names, because you only need one job. I know someone's just put in the comments about working for one organization, but I've found in my particular skill set, it's difficult to work for more than one company, because one company can keep one person very busy. You really haven't got any time to work for another company if you've got a contract, like typical IT contract. And so I get a lot of, in addition to LinkedIn, I get a lot of calls either from people that I've done work for in the past, or from recruitment agencies that I know that know me, just asking me when I'm going to be available. And that's usually quite a good way to find your next contract. Just keep telling them, your contract runs out at this date, give me a ring then, or just before. And then if you don't get an extension, then at least you've got something. People know to contact you back on a certain date, because it's in their best interest to contact you as much as it is for you to have, be speaking to them, because they get a kickback, don't they?
Cool. So we've got another question from, apologies if I don't pronounce this right. Is it Xia Chen or Xiao Chen? If somebody is to consider contracting for the first time in their career, what are the key professional criteria that should be met before you believe this person is ready for contracting? So I think this is probably, how do you know when you're ready to start contracting after your permanent career, possibly?
I mean, I guess in my sort of situation, someone, if you like, leaving a permanent position in the school has a flexibility in education to do agency work and can sort of build up the contracting side of it, alongside that, because supply work's, quite widely available. I guess it's different if you're working as a programmer in industry. I don't know but something in education, it could be something that could evolve. And if you get a big contract, you reduce the amount of agency work that you're doing, etc.
Yeah, I think I've got I've met a few people who've left permanent work to become contractors that potentially weren't suited to the lifestyle. And one of the things that I think you need to be able to do is know your job and how to do it. Be good and confident about that, not be too bolshy with it, because I think I was saying this last week to Andrew, and you can become in a permanent job if you've been there for a few years, and probably this is going to come out the right way, but you can become quite arrogant about your skill set, and people in your organization can they can kind of reinforce that feeling in you that you're very good. If you're good at something and you know your own little area in a big organization, and everyone comes to you and you're the guy or the girl who knows, then that can give you a false sense of like you being important and knowing everything. I know you probably do know that particular piece. but it puts your mind in a different sort of, in a certain way of thinking. If you then jump to being a contractor and you're going into a new organization where nobody knows you and no one treats you like that, it can be a little bit of a culture shock, and you need to step back a bit and not come across as being too try either. If you like jumping in, I can do that, I can do this, I can do that. Try to sort of, I found, tone that back a bit and try and fit in to the different. I think you find when you've been to a few different companies, because if you've stayed with one company for many years and that's the only company you've worked with, and then you suddenly find yourself in a new company or a series of different companies that maybe behave slightly differently, you kind of, one of the skills you just need to be able to do is fit in and not overstep. And I think a lot of people that I've worked with that weren't quite suited to it couldn't quite get that, and they also couldn't quite take the insecurity of it, that you've only got like maybe a 3-month contract, and what's going to happen after that, and what I'm going to do, and am I going to be worried about getting another contract? And I think if you're the sort of person that worries about that, or that is, absolutely the thing that you need to, you need job security, then this is potentially not for you, because you need to be able to relax. Otherwise you're on the edge all the time. That's not so good for your own, sanity.
Yeah, it does sound like it's something that's like really mindset, where having that confidence to take the leap, but knowing that you're able to take that risk and not sort of regret it, I guess. Do you think?
Yeah, I'm just wondering now how many contractors there are on the call versus permanent people.
It would be interesting, yeah. So feel free to just say if you're a contractor or a permanent IT employee. So we've got one contractor there, about to be contractor, permie. So what I'll do is, if you keep typing that, well, I'll ask one question while that list builds up, and we'll sort of see if people are more willing to speak about it. So question to Dave, actually, and John as well. This is a chat that we had last week, actually, about worth and money. So yeah. How do you know whether you are worth that £500 a day job or worth that £1,000 day job? How do you think you might? How do you know?
One of the things for me coming out of education was that, if you look at what you're paying into your pension contribution, there's quite a chunk of that goes into teachers' pensions, and various other, off takes, as we know when we look at it. I think when you're contracting, yes, you have to pay your own national insurance and tax, but yeah, for me, yeah, if you look what you can maybe get as a contract, it does look good, in some cases, but if you factor in what you would have paid, for if you were working full time, it's maybe not as good. But in my case, I'm late 50s, so I'm not so worried about my pension. For other people, they've got to put a lot of money into a permanent pension out of that. And that might be something, that you really need to consider. Obviously, we all need to consider that now, because that big money is not as big once you start to put money away, for your pension. And that's why I think it sometimes does look a lot, and people maybe have a misconception on that one.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that as well. I would say that, like, I'm not going to throw any specific figures, but when you look at that figure and you think, wow, that is a lot of money every day to earn, just picking up on John's point, you don't get that amount of money in your bank account. You do have to think about when maybe you're not going to be working for a few weeks, or possibly a few months you might be out of work. So you're thinking, if you're the sort of person that thinks to yourself, I need to sort of save some of that money, suddenly that amount of money that you're being paid isn't quite as much. But as versus the am I worth 500 or am I worth 1,000, what we were talking about last week, I would say if you if you have any doubt about what you're worth, then don't do it. Don't go contracting, because if you can't stand up and say, I'm worth £1,000 a day, and actually know it and believe it in yourself, then how is anyone else going to think you're worth it? So I would say, if you think you're worth £1,000 a day and you know you are, then that you are worth £1,000 a day, no matter what you do. Of course, if you start a contract, they'll see through you if you're not worth that, or if you are crap and you don't know what you're doing in the first day, they'll see through you. So make sure you know what you're doing before you say you're worth £1,000.
I guess if you look at you doing 2 or 3 contracts at the same time, and if you sometimes the days are long, aren't they? And but if you accumulate the 2, if you work long days, you can sort of see that figure might sort of jump up.
Really interesting answers there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, I think these are probably, a lot of people do think that, even myself, when I look through the job list and I say £1,000 a day, that's quite a lot of money. But you're right, it's the days, the sick leave that you don't get, the holiday days that you don't get.
Yeah.
There was somebody in my local area used to have quite a good income delivering takeaways on an evening, and somebody said to him one day, and this is true, how come you're making so much money? He was actually delivering for 2 takeaway companies, and when one was quiet, he was delivering the others. And he was really smart about it. Maybe that's a good tip.
I suppose you have to be a good accountant to be a good contractor as well, isn't it? Then
A creative accountant, I think they call it, isn't it?
yeah.
I wouldn't know anything about that. Are there any HMRC people on, by the way?
Everybody does the taxes, we promise.
We'll use that part in the recording, please.
So Jason Vaughan has got another question. What were the little nuggets you wished you knew when starting contracting that you know now? So what would you tell yourself if you were going to start contracting again in the past? So what would you tell your past self?
Well, I'm reasonably new, so I've just been doing it a couple of years. So I guess I don't think I have a lot to tell myself. I don't know how long David's been doing it.
Yeah, so I've been doing it for about 20 years. And it's, I would say to when I first started, don't worry about being out of work. Don't worry about like sick leave payments. Don't worry about taking holidays. Just be careful with, make sure you save your money. But don't worry about not getting another job, because I worried about that for many years, about a contract ending and not being able to find a new one. And the fact is, the more that you go to work, either as a permanent or a contract person, you're learning stuff in the IT industry all the time. If you're working usually on valid projects that are usually important, and you get involved in lots of different things, and those are all saleable skills for your next role, and no one's going to discount them. So when you go for that next role, you're working as a contractor, even as a permanent person, you're working. So you've got something to give. You've got, people want the skills that you've got. There's always someone who wants your skill. And also I've found if you go for a permanent role, there's often a very protracted process to get into a permanent job, maybe multiple interviews, maybe like assessments. You might have to do tests. In my experience, that's not the same for contracting. For contracting, they're more likely to have a phone call with you and get you in a few days, in my experience, as long as they can get the paperwork done. It depends on the size of the company, but if they don't like you after a few days, they can just kick you out. It's harder for them to kick out a permanent person, but a contractor you can be gone tomorrow if they don't like you. So their risk of taking you on at short notice with little interview, maybe just a telephone call, is much less. They can take a chance, they can take a punt on you. And if you're good, they won't let you go. And that's probably a bigger issue, them not wanting to let you go and to keep you there, because they've got, if you are good at your job, They might just want to keep you, you know, for a very long time. And then you might have to make a decision yourself.
That's really interesting, actually. I'd just touch on that one about the protracted way in, but there's also a protracted way out as well with 8-week notice periods. I'm just wondering whether there's any interesting discussion around the notice periods. We did have a conversation about this last week, but so say if you were going into a contract job, they'd want you to start straight away, but some of us have 8 weeks notice periods to work as permanent. So I'm just wondering, has anybody ever had the experiences around the transition from being stuck in that notice period, or just waiting, handing in their resignation and just hoping that there's going to be a job at the end of it?
That is a really difficult thing to do, though, isn't it? I mean, as a permanent person with a permanent full-time job, handing your notice in with nothing to go to. I mean, I'd ask a question to everyone on the call. What do you have to be, how do you have to be thinking to get to the point where you're handing your notice in? You know, what is it that gets you to that point? Are you so fed up with the job that you're doing? I don't know. Maybe someone has a comment on that.
Does anybody want to speak about it? I'm happy to unmute people, get a bit of a discussion going around. I think it might be really interesting.
I was going to add in education, a lot of schools and colleges now, you know, seek agency staff for fixed periods. So I think it is an issue for anyone coming into teaching, that it's quite difficult to get a permanent position sometimes, and that they want to actually employ people through agencies, so that in many ways, you know, people are temporary anyway, and it's very difficult to get full-time jobs. So certainly not there isn't as many opportunities as there were. That's from an education point of view. So contract work isn't such a big risk if you're on a temporary contract anyway.
Cool. So is there any more questions from anybody? Let's keep the ball rolling.
I think we've got a hand from Michael.
See that. So Michael's got a question. Oh, sorry, I muted you again. There we go. I've asked to unmute. There you go. You should be able to speak, Michael. Don't think we can hear you. No, we can't hear you, Michael. I think we've got you unmuted on here though. But unfortunately I can't hear you. Might be worth typing it. What I'll do is I'll try unmuting somebody else. Stevie's the next on my screen. I'll unmute you, Stevie, just to see if it works for you as well.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Stevie. Yeah. So I wonder, Michael.
I'll just fill the gap while he sorts this. But I wanted to talk about the sort of the notice period. I'm just about to leave the military, and the sort of the notice period is 7 months at the shortest and 12 months usual. And whilst that can be frustrating because you might see great opportunities come and pass you by that you can't take advantage of, there's also something a little bit reassuring about it, because it gives you time to sense what's out there, sense the value of what you might earn, and learn all about the problems of things like IR35. It's terrifying, because as you get closer to that point, you really do need something to jump to, just for peace of mind, not necessarily financially, because you're used to that permanence and that support.
What sort of did you say you're just starting? You've got one lined up? Have you muted him again, Andrew?
2 seconds. I've asked to unmute. There we go.
Yeah. As soon as I started speaking, I was gone. I do have something lined up, but you know, I'm 25 years service, and I'm looking at 6 months of a contract, and that's quite good. But equally, I've only got 4-week notice. So if on day 2 they say, Stevie, you're not the stuff, see you next month. No, we won't. You've got a month. Pack your bags, start looking. That also might be quite good, because I think I might have honed some skills at job hunting.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking about resources to apply myself in that 4 weeks.
Yeah. I think 6 months is a long time, isn't it? And you know, if you know what you're doing in that role, in that skill set that they're employing you to do, whatever that might be, 6 months is a good length, really. Even 4 weeks is a if they don't like you after 1 day, you might be able to like get 4 weeks worth of pay out of them for doing not much.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad deal either. I know I've seen people that they've done that to, organizations have done that to, and I've thought to myself, you know, you could make a career out of that. You've just done nothing for the last 4 weeks, and they can't get rid of you. In the old,
it doesn't end up like that.
In relation to IR35, one of the things that they used to look for when talking about whether you're inside or outside was, one of the things that used to be was your notice period, whether you had a notice period or not. Because if you know, plumber doesn't have a notice period. If you don't like their work, you just kick them out of your you know, of your kitchen or whatever. It was better to not have a notice period at all. So a lot of the like stuff I used to work on didn't have, it was 1 day, you know, the notice period was 1 day in both directions. But companies don't want to take that risk on you now. So 4 weeks is it's a decent amount.
In terms of IR35, I probably didn't articulate this very well in the text, and I'm going to plainly ask it, because I'm sure no such thing as a stupid question. So IR35, as I understand it, just means the company whose premises I'm going to go and provide a service for, they're going to give me my money that they've agreed to, and it's up to me to pay the tax on what I do with that money, whether that becomes what do they call it, a dividend, or I pay capital gains tax or income tax, national insurance, that sort of thing. But
are you setting up a limited company?
I've done that, yeah. But the way people talk, people often talk slightly in tongues about being tripped up or caught out, or, you know, and it was great. It was great watching the camaraderie between you guys earlier. But I'm really keen, because I feel like I'm about to go searching for mines using my feet.
And yeah, and in relation to IR35, it's obviously been over people's heads for, you know, for over the last 20 years, you know, since 2001 or whenever it was. And there's always been an issue throughout that whole period where you might step on one of those mines and someone's going to ask you to pay back all the tax that you haven't paid, which could be a lot of money. And you'll have seen that people are, you know, you'll seen the headlines and the cases, that are big cases recently of examples where that's been happening. But now, if you're going to work for a company and they're saying that the role that they're providing you is outside IR35, they're determining that for you. Yeah. In the older days, you would determine that for yourself. So it would be you getting it wrong. As I understand it now, it's the companies getting it wrong. They become liable for the tax difference. In practice, what that means is, I think they'll just take the money from you anyway. But in theory, it should be better now for you to start with either an inside or an outside role than it was in the past. It's just that obviously, if you're inside, you're just paying slightly different tax.
If I could pick up on one point there, and it might if I drift down a rabbit hole, just mute me again. Insurance. Now, as part of the contract, I have been told I have to take out IR35 insurance, and that's for all sorts of investigations and things like that. And it's not that expensive, and I don't really mind doing it. But ultimately, if the status has been determined for me, do I really need that?
I don't personally understand why they would tell you that you need insurance, unless it's a small company you're going to work for.
No, it's big.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they would want. I'm not sure about that. I don't know the answer to that. I know you need like professional indemnity insurance,
Yeah.
and you need employees liability insurance, and you need that anyway. Whether you want to take out insurance against an IR35 investigation in which they would pay your legal fees and represent you, like Kudos or some company like that.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be, you might want to do that as well anyway, just in case.
Okay.
If you see, it's really tricky. I'm not 100% an expert, and it's being recorded, so I'm not going to say like you know, that I know everything about it, but I've just had a lot of experience about proving whether a role is inside or outside in the past, quite a few times.
Excuse me.
And obviously it's quite difficult, and a lot of it falls down not just to the contract that's been written, but the practices that you personally, the way that you actually executed the contract.
Delivering services. So I had to go through a Kudos. You mentioned Kudos, a Kudos assessment, and I haven't had that back. But I assume basically that is all the questions were aimed at defining the way that I interacted with that company. Was that as an independent, very much akin to your description in the early part of this, or was it as someone who was in the company, took holidays when they were told they could take holidays, that kind of thing, other than the environment, health and safety, applied with all of the company policies and had line management responsibilities, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, I might be speaking out of turn, but it's all a lot of crap that they're trying to, all those things that you've mentioned, they're all relevant, and mutuality of obligation between, whether the company is obliged to give you work or not, and whether you're obliged to do it, and whether they can move you on to different things, and how strict are they in managing your time, and how autonomous are you. Those are all like little bits, and whether you got the right of substitution, and whether you've executed that right, so you can send someone else in instead of you, aren't, a lot of those things are not relevant to roles that I've ever done. You can't just rock up at a company and then suddenly say, I'm going to send my mate tomorrow. How is he going to know what to do? You can't, even if he's got the same skill set as you, he hasn't been onboarded in that company. He hasn't got the access rights. They haven't vetted him. You can't just, it's not like a plumber just coming to your house. It's completely different in the IT industry. You can't just send anyone to do the role that you've been employed to do. And at that point, you are providing a personal service where you personally have to be the person that provides it. And that's their argument. And the other argument is you're just sitting on a desk next to someone else who's doing the same job as you. And so whilst people might not like this, if you're an IT contractor like me, I would say you pretty much are inside IR35. You can argue the toss, but you are an employee of that company. You rock up like everyone else. You don't have their holiday benefits. You don't have their sick pay. And you might argue that that's like unfair, but you've chosen to take your money instead of those benefits. So when you say, it's 400 quid or 500 quid a day or 300 quid or whatever you get paid, or £1,000, you have to pay your sick pay, you have to pay your holidays, you have to pay any benefits that they're getting, you don't get. You're not supposed to, if you're outside, take advantage of, their offers for, you've got a free gym or something, you've got these benefits that might be available to you as a contractor as well. You shouldn't take those if you want to say you're outside. If you're outside IR35, you should be like be able to do many jobs. You should be having lots of different customers, doing lots of different things at the same time, like you would imagine an accountant is, or maybe an architect working on multiple different projects, or you should have many customers. If you've got one customer and you're there 9 to 5 with everyone else, even if you're there, out of hours at your own cost, you can argue the toss, but I would say you're an employee like everyone else, and you should be paying the same tax as them. So in effect, you're inside. But if you're trying to argue the toss that you're outside, if the company agree that you're outside and they've given you a contract and they've said this is an outside contract, then you're working with them and they're willing to engage with you in that way, then you've got a much stronger case, because if they've determined it's outside, they'll more than likely be happy to engage with you in that way. So your operating practices will be much more geared towards not being an employee.
Mm-hmm.
So you're better off in that situation, and then obviously you save on the national insurance in that scenario.
And certainly
So
take the points that you mentioned earlier about sticking to the task to reduce the drift and don't overstep.
Yeah. Just go in, do what you're supposed to be doing, do the job, and leave. That's what I would say. Take the money.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there. So what I've done is I've unmuted everybody, so people should be able to now unmute themselves and talk. But if they want to do that, just obviously just be mindful of other people speaking. I can stop the recording as well, as just in case other people don't want to be on the recording. So we'll stop that now, but we can have a bit of a discussion around it now, because I think we've asked quite a lot of the main questions now. So if people want to hang around and ask more questions, feel free.